Hi folks, welcome to this special video on revision, especially useful when you're coming towards the end of a unit and you've got quite a lot to revise. Now, I'd suggest starting on your revision well before the date of your tests, of your unit tests or your final exams, and making sure that you have planned out what you're going to do well in advance. If you are coming to this last minute, some of these things won't be as useful to you. But if you're a planner and you're looking at this a little bit ahead of time, this should hopefully give you some hints and tips that will help you to maximize your study and therefore do better in your tests and exams. So we're going to look over a little overview of study tips and methods to use when covering a whole unit. We're then going to look at spaced repetition and active recall, which are the two most important study methods to use when you're planning out your revision schedule. And we're going to look at how you can use AI to maximize your revision and also past paper questions and the role that they play in helping you revise for tests. So let's start off first of all with a sort of overview of the main study tips and methods to use um, and when to apply them. So the earlier you start with studying, the better. Okay, I know this probably sounds a bit boring. You've probably heard it lots, but the more time you have, then obviously the more you're going to be able to revise. The more, and not just that, the more you're able to take the pressure off yourself and be prepared and know what you're going to do and when and so on. So time is your ally if you use it. It can also be your enemy if you don't use it and you leave things to the last minute. You need to think long term rather than short term. So it's not about the test next week. It's about the exam in May. So if you have left it too late for the test that's tomorrow or next week or whatever it happens to be, then don't panic. Okay, you obviously want to do well in the short term, but it's really about the long term goal here. So try not to catastrophize and think, well, what's the point? The test is tomorrow and I've got 8 topics to learn and I'm never going to learn it all. Instead, think, okay, it's about my exam in May. So if I start tonight and I learn all of topic 1, then I might not do so well in my test, but I'll do well in the topic 1 questions. And then what I can do is use the questions I got wrong in the test to then determine what I'm going to study in all of the other topics. And then think, okay, well, I've got 7 months until my exam. I actually can study all of Unit 1 in 7 months. I can't do it in one night, but I can do it in 7 months. Okay, so think long term rather than short term. Small bouts of revision regularly, i.e., 20 minutes a day, is better than 4 hours the night before the test. Okay, so if your test is in a week, for example, don't think, okay, I'm going to wait until the night before and then study the whole evening or do an all-nighter or something daft like that. Instead, think, okay, I've got 7 days. If I do 20 minutes or half an hour each day for the next 7 days, I'm probably going to cover most of the content. And that's going to be better for you than try to do 4 hours the night before. And the reason why 20 minutes a day is also good is because it uses the process of spaced repetition. Okay, so that's where you're spacing out your studying and you're recalling stuff from the previous day. And the more that you study, then recall, and then study, then recall the knowledge, the more likely you are to remember it in the test. And that brings us on nicely to some of the techniques we'll be looking at, and we'll talk about them in a moment. But that's spaced repetition, active recall. That's where you are being asked to recall the stuff that you've learned. Okay, remember that exams are an output process. You're taking information out of your head and putting it on the paper. It's not an input process. So if you spend all your revision time just simply with input, i.e., revising, trying to get information into your head, then you're not going to be very good at the output part. And that's where active recall really helps. And alongside active recall are doing past paper questions, because again, that's testing the same principle. But the good thing about past paper questions is they're applicable directly to your exam. Okay, they're going to be in the style of and in the same level of and the same standard as the questions you'll face in your exam. And that's why they are such good preparation. You should use a variety of techniques during your study sessions. That I would suggest trying to vary it so that if you're studying the same topic a second time, don't use the same method you used the first time. Try and vary it, because by doing so, you're creating new neural pathways within your brain to that bit of information. And the more pathways you have to that bit of info, the more likely you are to be able to recall it and to remember it in the test. So there are techniques like the Pomodoro technique, which is a timed study technique. You can choose how long it's going to be, 20, 25 minutes. You study for that amount of time, and then you give yourself a break for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever works for you. And during that break time, you don't study, you do something else that you enjoy or relax. So it might be, for example, you get your phone, you lock it in a drawer. Okay, after 20 minutes of studying, you can then get the phone back out and look at it for 10 minutes. Then you put it in the drawer and you study again for 20 minutes. Okay, that's the Pomodoro method. There's the blurting method, which I quite like for biology, and that's where after you have revised something, you then cover it up or close the book and you write down as much as you can possibly remember from everything you've just studied. And don't worry about gaps, don't worry about blanks, that's fine. You'll write down everything you can remember. Then, when you feel that you can't remember anything else, you open your notes again and with a different colour of pen, you write down everything that you missed. And what that does is it clearly highlights the stuff that you have not remembered and that you're struggling to recall. And then that means the next time you revise that, you'll focus on the stuff that's in the different colour of pen, the stuff that you couldn't recall the first time. And if you keep doing blurting, eventually you'll get to a point where you remember everything. And especially for like the likes of the extended response questions in biology, the longer questions, blurting is a really good method of revision. There are flashcards as well, which are good. Now, the key thing about flashcards is to do them in the form of some sort of question where you can quiz yourself. And the reason for that is because of what we talked about a moment ago, which is active recall. If you simply rewrite your notes but onto pieces of card, then it will have some good. You will remember some of that, but doing active recall will be better. So, for example, rather than writing the nucleus controls the cell's activities, you would write what is the function of the nucleus, and then on the back you would write down the nucleus controls the cell's activities. Okay, so you're using it like an active recall, like a little test, rather than just simply rewriting the notes. And also using things like read aloud technology. Now, we're going to talk about technology in general in a minute or two, but there's so much available for you guys these days in terms of studying. The read aloud technology is good because it can be quite a passive process that you can do while you're busy with other things as well. So if you're going out for a walk or you're having to tidy your room or whatever, you can put on, use the read aloud technology to read out your notes back to you, and you can still sort of do a little bit of sort of passive revision while you're doing other things as well, and that might be useful. I always say to my students, it's a good idea maybe to dictate your notes and record them on your phone. And then what you can do is, if you're sitting in the bus and you're bored, or in the train or something and you're really bored, you can just play and it'll read aloud the notes to you. Which is, I think, a good technology that you can utilize. Plan your study sessions for each week. Okay, at the start of each week, it is useful for you to say, right, on a Monday, I am going to do biology, on a Tuesday, I'm going to do maths, on a Wednesday, I'm going to do English, on a Thursday, I'm going to do chemistry, at the weekend, I'm going to do music. Okay, whatever it happens to be, and not just that, not just saying the subject, but saying specifically which topic you're going to look over, which technique are you going to use. The more planned and prepared you are, the more you write these things down, the more likely you are to keep your promise to yourself. Okay, if you say in your own head, "Oh, I'm going to study more this week," and you leave it there, the chances are you are not going to study more this week because there's no accountability there. Whereas when you plan and write down things, then you are far more accountable because you've written it down. It's physical there, it's tangible, and if you don't do it, you're going to get that constant reminder of that thing you wrote down looking back at you. Okay, so studying your sessions each week help to keep you accountable. Now, there's lots of online planners, things like Notion, for example, but you can also just use a bit of pen and paper. Either one works just as well. Okay, and I've done a sort of a rough sort of revision schedule there on the right side of the screen. So I've got put the subject, the topic, the date that you learned it, i.e. in school, and then what I've done is I've then used spaced repetition to help you structure your revision for that topic. So we're going to be revising at day 1, 4, 7, 10, 14 and 28, as well as doing past paper questions. And you can see there that is very structured. It keeps you accountable and you can tick them off as you go, and you can see that progress being made for every single session that you do. And don't worry if you miss one or two, just try and make up for it when you can. Okay, it's okay if it's not in the exact day that it says in the schedule there. So planning your study sessions for each week are going to really help you to keep you accountable. And lastly, if you are poor at keeping yourself accountable, if you find that you are not very good at keeping your own promises, then enlist the help of your peers. If you study with your peers, and I don't mean like sitting in the same room as them, I just mean like that you have a chat, a group chat where you just say, okay, we're all going to study for half an hour on this day at this time, and you all check in at the start and you say, right, this is what we're going to do. Then you all check in again at the end. That accountability from peers can be just as powerful, if not more powerful, than when you're just being accountable to yourself. I know That's personally true of me. When I'm accountable to someone else, I'm far more likely to do something than when I'm just accountable to myself. Okay, so that's a good idea. And maybe you could have like a wee chart online or something where you all, when you do your revision, you all check in and you can see, I don't know, who does the most study sessions, whatever, across a term. But anything like that, where you're using peers and also the peer pressure that comes with that, is useful actually for keeping you accountable. Well, at the same time, obviously, me saying that, if you find that the pressure of that, if someone is, I don't know, they're saying that they're studying 7 hours a night and you can't keep up with that, then obviously feel free to check out and don't feel that you have to do the same as everyone else. But if you just find that you're not doing anything, peers can often be a good help in that situation. Okay, so what is spaced repetition and active recall? Well, those in my classes will know that I talk about the forgetting curve all of the time. This was a study that was carried out by a German scientist, Ebbinghaus, a long time ago. And basically, what the study showed was that when you first learn something, you very quickly forget everything you have learned. Okay, and this little graphic on the screen here shows us that. So if you first learn something and you feel like at the time, in the lesson, oh yeah, I understand all of that, that's great. Within a day, you've already forgotten 20%. Within 3 days, you've already forgotten 40%. And obviously, if we kept going, to a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, you've probably forgotten the majority of what you learned in that lesson. Now, this is why spaced repetition is important. If you go and revise what you've learned in a lesson the day after, okay, the following evening or whatever, and you just spend 15, 20 minutes reading over those notes and reviewing them, okay, that is going to improve your retention. Now, what's interesting about this forgetting curve is that for every repetition you do, every time you review your information, you do some revision, you notice that not only does the information go back up to 100% retention, but when you do inevitably forget, and that happens, that's a natural part of how our memories work. When you do eventually forget, note that the curve is much less steep and that it takes much longer for you to forget the same quantity of information. Okay. So that even just one revision the day after will make a huge impact on how much you remember. But if you then start doing spaced repetition, so day 1, day 3, they've got here, day 6, however you space it out, I've suggested 1, 4, 7, 10, 14, and 28, but it's totally up to you how regularly you space it. But 1, 3, and then 6, what you notice is by the time you get to the third repetition there on day 6, you're not really forgetting an awful lot. In a couple of days, you've only lost 10% there. So actually, with the average human needing to rehearse something on average 6 times before it goes into your long-term memory, if you did 1, 4, 7, 10, 14, and 28 days, and you did a review of what you learned in a lesson, then it's going to go into your long-term memory and it's going to stay in there. Okay, so the irony is you need to remember the forgetting curve. Okay, but just having information in your head, just remembering all this stuff is not enough for the exam. It will help you a lot. It will get you so far, but it's not enough on its own. You need to be able to retrieve that information and apply it to questions and situations. And this is where active recall comes in. So questions force you to recall relevant learned information, and past paper questions are also a great source of these. But these days, so are things like AI that I spoke about a few moments ago. So using AI now, obviously, when it comes to actual work, coursework, etc., you should obviously not be using AI to do work for you. However, AI is a tool that can be used to increase productivity, to make you more organized, and to help you revise. So there are many sites out there using the AI that could help you with studying, such as Palme or Gizmo, and there's loads more than just that. That's just to name two. And some of them cost money, some are free, some just have a free trial and then they cost money. It's up to you to go out and explore and use the one that suits you best. I'm not going to recommend any. I'm not affiliated with any of them. But I was having a play with a few of them over the last couple of weeks, and I've noticed that some of them are pretty good. I would have loved to have had those when I was studying for exams and so on. And obviously, there's also things like ChatGTP, which you can use for free. And you can use that for various purposes in terms of getting you organised. If you say all your subjects and how long you've got to study and so on, it might make out a study timetable, for example, for you. If you input your notes into one of these sites, including ChatGTP, you can then ask it to create quizzes for you, exams, questions, resources, rewrite the notes for you, whatever you want the AI to do. If you put in the original notes, and this is important, it means that the notes are relevant to your qualification. If you're studying National 5 biology, put in your National 5 biology notes, because then it knows which source material to choose from. If you don't do that, it will probably give you a random biology quiz that you can't do. So put in your notes and say, based on this information, can you write me a 50-mark test paper on Unit 1 of National 5 Biology? And it'll do that for you. Now, it might not be perfect, but it'll be good enough that it will help to test your active recall and will help you for your exam. You can also upload past papers into these things as well and ask AI to recreate similar questions to those that are in the past papers. And that's good in terms of familiarity and helping you get used to what the SQA, the exam body, will be asking you in the exam. Many of these sites also have other revision functions like reading your notes to you, making flashcards. There's loads and loads of functions depending on which site you go on. And again, these all could be really useful for you because, traditionally people have different study styles, right? The way that we absorb information is different. And so by exploring all these sites, you should be able to find the one that's going to help you based on your own preferences. Other sites like Notion can be good for planning. I mentioned that in the previous slide, but so can a basic diary or a paper planner. Some allow you to track your study hours and create schedules for you too. So do explore what's out there for you, but obviously not for too long because you have some studying to do. And lastly, that brings me on to the past paper questions. I am a big advocate of doing the past paper questions and not just doing some of them, but doing all of them. Okay, the SQA have the last few years of past papers available on their website, but other sites will give you older past papers and marking instructions. I always upload them for my own students, all the way back to 2014 when Nat 5 started, along with the marking instructions. I think like Jab, Chem, and a few other sites have all of the old ones on them as well. They tend to be, they're often like scanned ones though rather than digital ones. Look out for that in terms of the quality. I would suggest doing all of them, even just for unit tests. So the exam is chronological. So the first third of each section is usually Unit 1, the middle third is Unit 2, and the final third is Unit 3, roughly. Okay, I know that there can sometimes be a wee bit of a rejig there, but usually that's the order. So if you're studying for your Unit 1 test in the next couple of weeks, do all the past paper questions for Unit 1, i.e. the first third of each section in the exam, and do them all, because if you have done all of the past paper questions and you can get the correct answer, there's so little for you to fear from tests or exams. There's very little the SQA can do to surprise you because they are limited to asking about the content that's on the course specification document. So they're essentially reinventing the wheel with their questions. They're asking the same stuff in different ways rather than coming up with something completely new to assess you on. So keep that in mind, that if you do all of the questions, you are probably not going to be surprised when it comes to the exam or for even your class tests. Familiarity is your friend, so familiarity reduces anxiety and stress for tests and exams, and it will help you perform better. The clearer your head is of all of the hormones and chemicals that are released during anxious and stressful moments, the clearer your head is, and the more likely you are to be able to recall the information that you require for your test. Okay, the more of these test papers you do, the more questions you do, the more prepared you are, the less anxious you're going to be, and that's only going to help your performance. Okay, so I hope that was a useful little session on how to revise for our tests, especially the biology tests, the unit tests, and so on that you might get in class. But also, this is all useful. It can be applied to other subjects and obviously to final exams, etc. too. Okay, folks, thanks for now. Class dismissed.